an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Shadow and Bone, chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9. In these chapters, Alina meets Genya, a tailor, Grisha, who seems to be on the receiving end of some unfortunate attention from the king, as well as on the receiving end from some unfortunate attention from the queen. So that's fun. Good for her. And also, Alina is now a Grisha, and she does not know how to grish. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Jaime for commissioning this episode. Jaime is in the chat. Hi, Jaime. This episode, these chapters, guys. So first of all, I want to thank Christine, I believe it was, who sent me the email, which outlines exactly what chapters to read for each section, because I mentioned last time that this is not numbered the normal way, because Kindle books can be annoying. And it turns out I read like 85 pages instead of the 50 that I was aiming for. So I went a little bit overboard. But this time around, I've reached more reasonably around the 50-page mark. These chapters are super duper fun to me. I am just so here for like any introduction to a new way of life is just not even a strong enough way of saying this. Any introduction to a whole new like system of living, I suppose, in a story. This is like getting introduced to everybody at Hogwarts, practically, you know. And I love all of the Eastern European styling of everything, from the clothing to the descriptions of the buildings to the food it's just a really unusual aesthetic. I feel like so much fantasy really gears towards, like, if we're not doing outright Celtic, we're at least dabbling in like Norse. And this is just a little bit more unusual, and honestly, it's more in my personal wheelhouse, and I'm not really sure why that is, other than as a little kid, I read books, like children's books and whatnot, that were, I won't say like set in Eastern Europe, because that was never clear, but there were a lot of illustrations that felt like they were of that area. The clothing, especially the buildings at times. And it just caught my imagination, you know? And there's something about like the cold weather being almost like a force that determines so much of how people live, that I'm somebody, anybody watching this right now can see my office behind me. I am somebody who really lives in the seasonal mindset. And as much as I love spring and being able to go outside in a sundress and all of this, winter is really my jam. And like living somewhere that focuses so much on, we're going to have like gorgeous fireplaces in every room. And if not fireplaces, we're going to have elaborate ovens tiled in different colored ceramics, or we're going to have these really elaborate samovars filled with hot drinks and all of these different things that you can spike them with. All of this is like hygge lifestyle to the max, and I am absolutely on board. And it's just not really that common in a lot of fantasy stories. It's often, I feel like their fantasy, especially male written fantasy, can often be driven by an eagerness to show how tough people are, and therefore how they have like the setting be rather brutal. They have the surroundings be very like rustic, bordering on unlivable. And it's just really nice to like have a fantasy story where things are beautiful and we want everybody to be comfortable and have a good time. And not that that's actually what's happening, because obviously Alina herself comes from a background of being poor and hungry and cold a lot of the time. So this doesn't feel like an artificial thing in this story where, oh, isn't it convenient that nobody suffers in this? That's not it at all. But we're being brought to a place that is a comfort in a similar way as Hogwarts was a comfort to Harry, who was brought up with a family that did not care about him, that didn't bother to buy him clothes that fit, that did not bother to feed him adequately. So she's coming in somewhere where there's like a bed with amazing comfy sheets and blankets, a giant bathtub that she can sink into, and new clothes, and they've all been custom made for her. The only shortcoming is breakfast, which she is very disappointed to find out is just like herring and rye bread, apparently, because this is like a bit of an affectation from the Darkling where he's attempting to be like, well, we're like, we haven't forgotten our roots. And she's just kind of like, yeah, but you're eating it off of porcelain with like sterling silver. You have forgotten, like, it's fine. Just be what you are and don't pretend that you like connect with the commoners. And I totally agree with her on that. But yeah, I'm just, this was like a bit of a fantasy for me. This is like, what if winter could continue on in this sort of vein and be this kind of cozy? I don't know that I would really mind it as much, you know, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I would. Kai says, you don't know how excited I was to spend my first winter in Connecticut after a lifetime of living in the tropical. Listen, and I moved down here to Texas and it's like 60 degrees this coming week. And I'm super bummed about it. I just like, it's hard to get into the spirit of the thing when you're sweating, you know, or it's just, I don't know. It's just, I miss it. I really miss it. And I miss the snow. Like, especially since I can work from home. I will say that. I didn't miss the snow when I was having to drive in it. But anyway, let's get on topic. So chapter 6, Alina wakes up. She has had this like terrible dream, where the Volcra has like the gray quartz eyes that the Darkling has. She can hear like Mal laughing somewhere, calling to her. And she just wakes up, and it's because somebody is knocking on the door and they are very urgent about it. And she is irritated and tired and really sore. Like, she had just gotten off of that horseback ride that took like several days and she barely got through it. So she opens the door and it says, she was easily the most beautiful person I'd ever seen. Her wavy hair was deepest auburn, her irises large and golden. Her skin was so smooth and flawless that she looked as if her perfect cheekbones had been carved from marble. She wore a cream-colored kefta embroidered in gold and lined in reddish fox fur. Yeah, that sounds pretty awesome. I know that this is being made into, I don't know if it's a TV show or a movie, but I would be very interested to see who they cast, because, you know, it's always like difficult when you are casting a character who is supposed to be literally like otherworldly beautiful. That's a tall order. And it's rare that I ever really feel like they got it right on TV or in movies. But Jamie says a TV show. I feel like that's much more appropriate. This would not do well as a movie. There's way too much to deal with. So yeah, apparently she comes in and immediately stops dead and looks at Alina and is just like, what the fuck? Because Alina has like bruises and cuts on her face. She's still covered in like dirt. She's got blood on her. She basically came into the building reeking of horse and just like collapsed in bed without doing the slightest bit of, you know, primping is the wrong word, just kind of cleaning off. And Alina, meanwhile, is like being tossed around by the servants and finally like puts her foot down and is like, tell me who the fuck you are and what is happening. Because Genya is just trying to like dress her like a doll and drag her out somewhere and not tell her shit. And Alina's not having it. And she says, my name is Genya. In less than an hour, you will be presented to the king, and it is my job to make you look presentable. So they take her into the bathroom, scrub her down, wash her hair, and she thinks that she's about to be put into like some beautiful clothing. And I think in the back of her head is expecting to have her kefta in this moment. But instead, she is being put back into like a fresh military uniform. And it's an interesting moment because when she's talking about this with Genya, there is a bit of a hint of exactly what is to come in terms of dealing with the court. But we'll get there in a second. So Genya does first of all, a bit of healing on her. She's not like a healer, but she can do just the basics and get rid of the cuts and the bruises and whatnot. And I love that she says that she's a tailor and Alina doesn't know what that means and is like, are you going to make me a dress? And she's like, fuck, no. I'm tailoring you. And then she points to herself and says, you don't think I was born looking like this, do you? And I really like that there is no artifice to this. She's like, oh yeah, no, I've worked on myself for literally years. So I have perfected myself, but I've had a lot of time to do it with. And it's a weird combination of like being incredibly conceited and being like, I am literally perfect. And admitting like, not naturally, I had to work on this. I'm just very, very good at what I do, which is another bit of like conceit, which I just really like, it's fun. And meanwhile, Alina is like very self-conscious about how she looks, but she feels really weird about the idea of like looking in the mirror and not recognizing herself. And Genya's like, no, I'm not making you look like a different person. I'm just going to make you look like a better version of yourself. And this is something that I really like wish that people who railed against wearing makeup could understand about it. Not even necessarily to like do it themselves. When I say understand it, I'm not trying to convince anybody to wear makeup who doesn't want to. But there's a lot of an attitude out there with certain people that wearing makeup is like lying, which is just really annoying. Or that it's like, you only do it in order to, because you feel bad about yourself and you're trying to feel good about yourself. And even if that were true, what's so wrong with wanting to feel good about yourself using makeup? Like, that's fine. And B, it's like a big part of learning how to do makeup well is learning to accentuate things that are there that are already beautiful and making them look more interesting or more dramatic or whatever. It's an art, and that's fine. But yeah, she tells her, I can even out your skin, do something with your hair. I've perfected myself, but I've had my whole life to do it. And Genya says, why are you taking this so personally? When Alina literally is like, get out. And Alina says, why wouldn't you take it personally? And she says, I have no idea. I've always been beautiful. And humble, too. She shrugged. So I'm beautiful. That doesn't mean much among Grisha. The Darkling doesn't care what you look like, just what you can do. Then why did he send you? Because the king loves beauty, and the Darkling knows that. In the king's court, appearances are everything. If you're to be the salvation of all of Ravka, well, it would be better if you looked the part. You're not ugly, Thanks, I said dryly. You just look a little tired, sickly, skinny. Well, you said yourself you've been traveling hard for days, and this is how I always look. Fine, do it. Thank you. I love Genya just being like so happy. Listen, I like the fact that Alina is like, she's relieved because the Darkling told her to, and she was worried what would happen if she didn't. But I also like the idea that Genya is just like a lot of us regarding wanting to give somebody a makeover, and genuinely is like, you have so much potential, and if you don't let me do this, I will literally die. Because, yeah, that is a thing. I have had that with friends and boyfriends and whatnot, and I'm like, you could be super duper attractive if you would just like do this thing with your hair, or if you would just stop wearing your eyeliner like that. What are you doing? You know? So what she does is indeed even out her skin. All of her blemishes and scrapes go. Circles that have been beneath her eyes ever since she was a kid go. She gives her a little bit of a flush, and then she combs actual gold leaf through her hair, using her power to like infuse her hair with the color so that it's like shiny and looks healthy. And I love that Genya's like, it's really the best I can do for now. Like, and she then follows it immediately up with, but you don't really want to attract too much attention from the king either. And this is an interesting lead in to the next indication, which is what I was mentioning earlier. The king expects to see a humble girl plucked from the ranks of his army, an undiscovered treasure. If you appear in a kefta, he'll think the Darkling's been hiding you. Why would the Darkling hide me? For leverage, for profit, who knows? But the king is, well, you'll see what the king is. So, yeah, that's really, really interesting. I am loving the idea that the Grisha work with the king and are like sanctioned and everything, but also, of course, any normies are going to view people who have like literal magical powers with some sort of suspicion and fear. And it is also really surprising to me that the king looks as he looks and has not gotten himself tailored, because I would have expected him to do that. But I suppose that requires any sort of belief that your own appearance matters versus women who are decorative. But yeah, I am into this whole idea, and I know that there's like a lot about how Alina looks sickly and is like not very strong. And I am continuing under the assumption that this is because she has not tapped into her power yet. She just has a lot of trouble accessing it, and she's able to do it when she's sort of held by the hand by the Darkling or Bagda later. But I think that that's part of the thing, is that she has like somehow repressed her magic to such a degree that it is causing her to like lack vitality somehow. Because, we were just reading the other trilogy, and we have the whole thing with Nina and her magic like inverting. So it used to be about life, and then it suddenly becomes about death because of the parem. And she is constantly sickly until she starts to actually use that power. And then all of a sudden her color comes back, her appetite returns, or a lot of her strength returns. So that's what I am thinking is probably going on with Alina, and I think the Darkling might be aware of that. And I think when he points out the scar on her hand, it might be tied to that somehow, that there was like a trauma there. But we'll see. We'll get to it. So she's led into the throne room, and she's like, she isn't even like, hasn't even gotten there, is she? Oh yeah. So she's being led in down the hall, and this guy Sergei comes up, and he is very attractive and is introducing himself with like quite a flourish. And he starts to say, "You'll be walking with us." He took me by the elbow and began to steer me toward a group of corporalki. "She's a summoner, Sergei," said a girl in a blue kefta with flowing brown curls. "She walks with us." "Marie, you can't possibly be suggesting that she enter the hall as a lower order Grisha." "Need I remind you that the Darkling is himself a summoner?" So you're ranking yourself with the Darkling now? I love this infighting. I fucking love it. These Grisha are petty little bitches, and they do not even like... It is amazing to see compared to, you know, the crew that we saw in Ketterdam, fucking struggling just to live, struggling to not be fucking trafficked and killed and raped. And then we've got these fucking children in this luxurious literal palace being pampered, getting their butts powdered like babies, and out here with these like petty squabbles that are just utterly meaningless in the face of things. That's just, it's really quite a contrast to what we've been dealing with before. And at this point, Alina, displaying her ignorance, is like, what if I just go with Genya? And everybody's like, what? And finally, the Darkling pops up and is like, she's going to walk with me. And the Darkling, it really is, any time that he appears, everybody goes silent, everybody stares. It's a lot of drama and just like, but it feels like kind of earned, because he also attempts to hold himself apart from everyone. It's pretty clear. It's like he does it on purpose, but then he resents it. And, you know, that sounds like a you problem, Darkling. I'm just saying. So chapter 7 begins with her being led in and everybody watching her, and Alina being like low-key glad that she let Genya do some work on her face, because she's like, wow, everybody here is so gorgeous that I would have really looked like shit in comparison. And I still don't look great, but it's better than nothing. Fuck. So she asks him about whether there are other tailors, and he says that Genya is unique. And she asks, why isn't she walking with the rest of the Grisha? Genya must attend to the queen. Why? When Genya's abilities began to show themselves, I could have had her choose between becoming a fabricator or a korpralnik. Instead, I cultivated her particular affinity and made a gift of her to the queen. A gift? So a Grisha is no better than a serf? We all serve someone, he said, and I was surprised by the harsh edge in his voice. Then he added, the king will expect a demonstration. And Alina's like, oh, fuck, come on, dude. I don't know how to do this. And he's like, relax. I know you don't. You dope. I will help you. It will be fair. So when they come into the room and she actually sees the king, she is disappointed. He looked to be in his 40s, slender and round shoulders with big watery eyes and a pale mustache. He wore full military dress, a thin sword at his side, his narrow chest covered with medals. Beside him on the raised dais stood a man with a long dark beard. He wore priest's robes, but a gold double eagle was emblazoned on his chest. So the Darkling presents her and then summons darkness and then touches her hand, and she feels the call from within him of her magic, and she's able to respond to it and just like, rather than fight it, just lets it come out. And it says, light flooded the throne room, drenching us in warmth and shattering the darkness like black glass, which is really cool. I would love to see what that looks like on screen. I'm looking forward to this. The court erupted into applause. People were weeping and hugging one another. A woman fainted, which, woman, get it together. All right. Just like, stop it. So the king is like delighted by this demonstration, but he does say something when he first sees her about how like she's very plain. And I'm just like, you know what? Somebody should slap his face. And he kisses her hands and calls her my dear girl. And she thinks about what Genya said about him and just feels like really fucking creeped out by him. And then she's even more creeped out by the priest. And she says that he smells like mildew and incense. Like a tomb, I thought with a shiver. Which, yo, what's that about? Is he like a necromancer? What's going on? I want to know about this. So she thinks that she's like past this of flying colors and she's about to be sent back to her room and that everything's all good. And instead, she gets sent to meet the queen. And she is very beautiful, but everything about her feels a little bit too exaggerated. She's like somebody who's just had a bit too much plastic surgery. It says her irises seemed a little too blue, her hair too yellow, her skin too smooth. And I love this because that is the kind of thing you'll meet somebody who's like, just their lips are so full and their eyes are so large. And you're just like, what's this person's like attractive, but they're also creeping me out. And what's that about? And then you start to realize, oh, it's because everything has just been a bit altered. And these kinds of features don't usually like coexist on a human face. It's like what I kept thinking about was, have you guys seen the clickbait articles about that woman who wanted to be like a living Barbie doll? And she got like all of this surgery to like shave down the size of her chin, and her lids were like lifted so that her eyes look larger, and she wears like contacts that make her irises look bigger, and everything is just like just a little bit wrong. That's sort of how I picture the queen, except not quite obviously quite as extreme. And she like greets the queen with a bow, which isn't exactly like what she's supposed to do, but nobody's really coached her on any of this. And the queen asks if she's from a Grisha family, and she says that she's not. And the queen is then like, all right, well, you know, your family will be notified of your new status. And Alina has to be like, actually, I don't have any family. I was an orphan raised in the Duke's household. And the queen is like, oh, how marvelous. I wasn't sure that I would describe my parents being dead as marvelous, but at a loss for anything else to say, I mumbled, thank you, moja tsaritsa. This almost seems so very strange to you. Take care that life at court does not corrupt you the way it has others, she said, her blue marble eyes sliding to Genya. The insult was unmistakable, but Genya's expression betrayed nothing, a fact which did not seem to please the queen. She dismissed us with a flick of her ring-laden fingers. And when she meets with the Darkling, and she's still with Genya as well after, he asks how it went, and she says, I really don't know. She seemed really nice, but was looking at me like I was literal shit. And they all start laughing, and they're like, yep, that seems right. The king seemed pleased. The king is a child. But today, you've made him a very happy child. And she asks about the priest that was standing next to the king. And he says that some people say that he's a fanatic or that he is a fraud. I say he has his uses, which I'll be very, very perked up paying attention to see what his uses are. So, as she is being left at the door of her bedroom and being told that she's going to be fitted for a kefta the next day, or she'll be fitted that night and the next day she will wear it for her beginning of her instruction, he tells Genya that the kefta will be black. And this is an interesting moment to me. Alina protests and is like, look, I really would rather be in blue. And Genya is like, what in the fuck is the matter with you? Which, like, later on it's pointed out to us that the colors that Genya is wearing are like servant's colors. She is not of rank in any way. And so to her, the idea that Alina is willingly giving up the chance to have something that denotes her of being of higher rank, that is just incomprehensible. The Darklings interested in her reasoning behind this. And Alina says that she feels like she already doesn't belong here, and that if she is singled out by wearing a different color than literally everybody except the Darkling, it's just going to feel even more like she's under a spotlight all the time. he says, are you so anxious to be like everyone else? And she says, I just don't want to be more conspicuous than I already am. And he eventually is like, all right, if that's what you want, sure. But Genya is just like, what the fuck is the matter with you? Now, this is one of those things where personally, I love attention. You know, I really feel like my instinct is to be like, take the black, girl. What are you doing? Not like at the wall, but. And then I think about the fact that she can't call her power. And I hate being bad at things. And if I were like amongst a group of people who were all proficient at a thing, and I were wearing a color or anything that denoted that I was like above them, and yet could not call my power, I think that would make it way worse. So, you know, initially I was kind of like, oh, come on, Alina, what are you doing? And then a moment later, when I really stopped to think about it, I was like, you know what? This is like, when I think about things within a crowd that I've been really bad at, I immediately go to sports. And I played basketball for like 30 seconds. And this reminds me of like, what if I was the sole person on the team wearing a sequin basketball jersey and I literally couldn't dribble? Humiliating. So yeah, I kind of feel for her on that. My knee-jerk reaction was like, come on. And then immediately I was like, no, I get it. Never mind. Maybe you'll feel like comfortable in black eventually, but I understand it for right now. And she then is left to have dinner, and Genya is about to send somebody to bring it, and then is like, well, maybe you'd rather eat with everybody else. And Alina's like, no, actually, I don't mind eating alone, like by myself in my rooms, but would you stay and eat with me? And Genya agrees, and then immediately tells her, like, look, you need to know a couple things. First of all, corporality and summoners and fabricators don't eat together. They keep to themselves, which Alina takes as her being like, I don't want to eat with you. And immediately Genya has to be like, listen, no, that's not it. You just have to understand how things work here. And I am honored to be asked to dine with you. I mean, this is like something that they would all be really fucking preening about if you ask them to eat with you. But they might not approve of it when they hear about it, because I don't really fall within any of their classes and they don't see what I do as valuable. And I really, really, really love Alina, like kind of watching her and thinking about like what Genya's going through, being in the same colors as all of the other servants. And that she's like not really a member of the court properly, but she's also not like one of them. And she says out loud, I always thought being beautiful would make life so much easier. Oh, it does, Genya said and laughed. I couldn't help but laugh too. This is one of those things like, it's a really fine line, right? Having been on kind of both sides of this, there is a freedom that comes from not immediately, like, I'm not trying to say, and everybody don't yell at me, I'm not trying to say I am unattractive now that I have gained weight at all, but I am not immediately noticeable to a lot of people who subscribe to like standard beauty, right? And there is a freedom that comes with that. And there is a, being seen more as a person first, to be honest, that comes with that. But that is not to say that being beautiful isn't an enormous advantage in the world, which comes with a ton of privileges that I desperately miss. And there are drawbacks and pros to everything. If I were going to choose, of course, being beautiful and having the privileges that go with that, especially if you have control over it, being born beautiful and having that as like an accident of nature. I mean, there's still privileges that go with that, but that's going to fade. If you are a Grisha who manages to like be able to sustain that beauty for longer than average, that's like I mean, that's literally what people are attempting to do for their entire lives, right? But there is a danger when you are, quote, too attractive, of either A, not being taken seriously, which run into that a lot. B, people assuming that you are only successful because of your looks, which is extremely frustrating. A lot of women fall into that when they are trying to get ahead in their careers. There are people who assume that they managed to do that by exploiting their looks. And, you know, even if they did, so fucking what? You know, whose like fault is that that's even an option? But yeah, there are like, the one that I always think of lately is there was a woman who was very attractive who won Great British Bake Off one year. And a lot of people have since claimed that she won because one of the judges thought she was hot. This person was clearly the person who should have won. But because she was beautiful, a lot of people just wanted to discount her accomplishments. And it's just a really gross thing to see happen, you know? So I like this, that there's on the one hand, Genya's like being apparently forced into being the king's mistress, which I don't feel like she was. From the way she talks about him, it doesn't seem like she gets a choice in this, and she didn't want this. And that is a drawback of being extremely attractive, is that you draw the eye of people that you don't necessarily want. And if you are in a position where you don't get to say no, then you're just kind of at their whim. But there is a power that you can exploit from that kind of situation as well. And of course, there are a million other advantages that are small throughout your regular day. So I like that they address that like being beautiful is difficult in its way, but it's not like it's just such a fucking cross to bear to be beautiful. You know, we're not going to pretend that this is so horrible a fate, especially considering that she has worked her whole life, as she put it, to make herself look perfect. She's going to do this to herself, even though it's so awful to experience this. No. So yeah, I thought that was handled pretty well. And she gets her, the person comes in and does all of the measurements. They double check and make sure you certain that you don't want to wear black. And she says blue again. And then she tells her that, the next morning she's going to come and get her for classes and also give her a tour of the palace, because it can be a bit confusing to get around. So she gets into bed and is just sort of thinking over what a bizarre turn of events this all is, and how differently she is living all of a sudden. That like she's wearing fabrics that are so fine, you know, so far outside of what she could ever hope to have been able to afford at one point. She literally never had anything made for her. She never had anything that was new except for like her uniform. And on the one hand, it's like a fairy tale being able to have all of this. And on the other hand, it feels really weird and unfamiliar and kind of alien. And she's a little bit uncomfortable with it, which feels fair. I also like that she says, I caught a glimpse of myself in the glass above the basin. Maybe it was the lamplight, but I thought I looked even better than when Genya had first finished her work on me. And I think that is a symptom of her having used her magic willingly earlier that day. So chapter 8, she wakes up and for a moment thinks that everything is a dream. And then there's a knock at the door and the servant is there with the blue kefta. And she's like, wow, all right, this is real life. And she begins to get dressed. And I really like the details, the small things about how she isn't quite sure how this day is going to go and how to like prepare herself. And she wants to take a bath, but she doesn't know if she has time. She wants a glass of tea, but she doesn't like have the courage to ring for a servant and demand that they bring it, which, yeah, that's like the kind of thing it's funny that I can be like as demanding a person as I am in general, but have such a problem asking for what I need from like service staff and stuff. It is the worst. I mean, I posted a while ago about like having hired somebody to come and clean my house, and they did a really shitty job. And I like had a horrible time demanding what I had paid for, and wound up sort of being like, hey babe, can you do this, from Owen? And I just like, the idea of having a servant who will like fetch things and do things, in theory, that sounds lovely. When I really think about like the reality of that, it gives me horrible anxiety. I don't know. It just sounds like somebody hovering all the time. And that gives me anxiety. I hate it. So I can understand this. So she pulls on the coat for the first time. And the description of it sounds so beautiful. The kefta was deepest midnight blue and fell nearly to my feet. The sleeves were wide, and though it was a lot like a coat, it was so elegant I felt as if I were wearing a gown. Then I noticed the embroidery at the cuffs. Like all Grisha, the etherealki, I'm hoping I'm saying these right, the etherealki indicated their designation within their order by color of embroidery. A pale blue for tide makers, red for inferni, silver for squallers. My cuffs were embroidered in gold. I ran my fingers over the gleaming threads, feeling a sharp twinge of anxiety, and nearly jumped when a knock sounded at the door. Very nice, said Genya when I opened the door, but you would have looked better in black. Ah, bless you, Genya. So, as she heads out, all of these people descend upon her, wanting her to come and sit with them for breakfast, and she has to decide where she's going to sit. And there is a bit of a headbutt between Genya and Marie again, because Genya tells her, have breakfast and then I'll take you on a tour. And Marie starts to be like, we can do that. And Genya says, the Darkling said that I should do it. And Marie says, what are you, her maid? Something like that, Genya said, and walked off to pour herself a glass of tea. Far above herself, said Nadia with a little sniff. Worse every day, Marie agreed. These two, they are the worst. And it's really funny to me because as Alina goes throughout the day with the two of them, she's just like, I fucking want to kill them. I hate them. Oh my God, what am I doing? And when she sits with the summoners, because she's in blue, she must, the Corporalki, who are in red, are really kind of like sulking at the fact that she isn't going to be part of their crew. And apparently it's like a big thing, like that the summoners sit to the right of the Darkling, even though evidently the Darkling like rarely even shows up to eat with everybody. So it's just like a bunch of petty nothing concerns. And it's funny. I find it very amusing. So this is when the rye and pickled herring are brought to the table. And Alina is just like, oh, God, no. Apparently, she really, really hates herring. But she does have some bread and there are plums. And it's like, apparently plums are not in season right now. So somebody must have a hothouse that they're growing them in. And she is delighted by that and by the fact that there is actual sugar, which is rationed in Ravka. And she has just not been able to get her hands on it almost ever. But here is just par for the course. And they're all sort of puzzled at the fact that she's so excited over it. And she feels embarrassed that she exclaims, oh my God, sugar, when she sees it, because it's like just underlining how different she is from everybody, that she hasn't been like a part of this, And everybody begins to quiz her about everything that happened with the crossing of the, what is it called? The fold? Is that the name of it? But yeah, they're a bit disappointed at the fact that she didn't kill a, what is it? Volkra? She says she didn't, but then she has to be like, well, I did faint. So I'm like, I wonder if you did. I kind of think you might have. And you just, So Genya comes and scoops her back up again and sort of rescues her from this conversation, this interrogation, really, and informs her that she also hates herring and that she gets pastries from the cook, and that she will maybe share if Alina continues being nice to her. So she is led to the library, and on the way there are some other like places that they pass that she asks about. So that way back to your room, that way to the Grand Palace. What about that way? I asked, nodding to the closed double doors behind the Darkling's table. If those doors open, pay attention. They lead to the Darkling's council room and his quarters. So later on, she is indeed summoned from there, and it does cause practically the entire room to go dead silent because it's apparently pretty rare. So she's led to the library, which is just absolutely gorgeous, and she feels like it was an interesting moment, actually. She thinks about how the Duke's library had seemed so grand, but compared to this place, it was a hovel. All of Karamzin seemed shabby and faded, viewed beside the beauty of the little palace, but somehow it made me sad to think of it that way. I wondered what Mal's eyes would see. And yeah, there is something about this kind of like opulence and beauty that while you can appreciate it, it also makes you angry a little bit that like this place has so much and others have nothing. She's thinking that to herself when she's led into the throne room earlier, because she's like going by these like sculptures of trees in the walls that are like the tree is made, the trunk is made of jade and all the leaves are made of diamonds. And she's like touching them, looking at them and thinking like, you know, we all just assume that we live in kind of a poor country. And now I'm wondering if that's actually what's going on, because they seem to have plenty and they're just hoarding it. Sounds familiar. Same old story. So Genya turned left, but I glanced down the hall to the right and saw two corporalki emerge from a large set of red lacquered doors. They gave us unfriendly looks before they disappeared into the shadows. Where do those doors lead? The anatomy rooms. A chill rippled through me. The corporalki, healers and heart renders. They had to practice somewhere, but I hated to think what that practice might entail. I quickened my steps to catch up with Genya. I didn't want to get caught by myself anywhere near those red doors. Yeah, it never really occurred to me what kind of practice what that would look like. But that's like, sounds like an actual horror story. So I really just never want to see that, and I hope we never do. And fingers crossed on that. So eventually they come to the fabricators, and there are the two door handles look like hands. They have been positioned to make the most of the clear eastern light, and the walls are made up almost entirely of windows. The brightly lit rooms reminded me a bit of a documents tent, but instead of atlases, stacks of paper, and bottles of ink, the large work tables were laden with bolts of fabric, chunks of glass, thin skeins of gold and steel, and strangely twisted hunks of rock. In one corner, terrariums held exotic flowers, insects, and I saw with a shudder, snakes. That sounds pretty cool. I feel like being a fabricator would be one of the more fun things. And this is where we meet David. And it's kind of fun. David has no time for either one of them. He's got a couple of discs that are made of apparently glass. And he's like, those are for you. And Genya's trying to like chat him up a little, and he does not give a shit. And as they leave, she's like, well, don't take it personally. If you're not made of metal or glass, he isn't interested. And Alina's sort of like, you're saying that kind of weird. And when she looks up at Genya, she sees that Genya's sort of blushing, and she realizes that like Genya's into David. And David just does not really seem to even notice her, which is amusing. I like that Genya's going for this guy who's like not particularly anything to look at, but very obviously very intelligent and very focused and dedicated, because #relatable. I'm just like, I like a dude's looks. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like my men to be cute, but there's a lot more that I notice first, to be perfectly honest. So they begin passing the workshops, and she asks why there aren't any windows. And she says skylights keep their secrets safe. But what do they do in there? Well, only the corporalki know, but there are rumors that they've been working with fabricators on new experiments, which I wonder if that has to do with those flying people that were like made of metal underneath their skin in the other books, because we never really found out about that, did we? But they seem like a combo. They're like, what do they call that? Biomechanical? I could see that. Let's see. That's where we're going, to the Summoner's Pavilions. All the way out there? It's the safest place for you to sort to practice. All we need is some overexcited inferni to burn the whole palace down around us. The fabricators have another place all the way outside the city where they work on blast powders. So, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. And there's also a group of, like, children. And it didn't really occur to me that they would all probably be located in mostly the same place. But, yeah, they're kept very separate. So she hasn't seen them until this point. And she's thinking to herself about the Grisha examiners that came to see if they had an ability, and what it would have been like for her if she had been scooped up back then instead of now. And she doesn't really know if that would have been better or not, because there would be a lot of like experiences that she would have missed out on. And probably her and Mal would also have lost touch. So part of her is kind of glad that they weren't able to zero in on it, but now she's like not able to access the power, so she's frustrated. And what happens when they finish? They become members of the Second Army. Many are sent to the great houses to serve with noble families, or they're sent to serve with the First Army on the northern or southern front, or near the fold. The best are chosen to remain at the little palace to finish their education and join the Darkling service. And their families are apparently compensated handsomely, as she puts it. But they don't really go home to visit their families. Genya tries to act like this is no big deal, but Alina kind of gets the vibe that maybe it is, and Genya's just trying to be casual about it. So eventually they finally get to Bagda's hut, and Bagda does not answer the door when it is knocked. But once she goes inside, she is accused of being late, even though she had been there a minute and was just waiting for somebody to come to the door. The inside of the hut is like super fucking hot, to the point where she starts sweating the moment that she comes inside. And this leads to a series of proddings and pokings and, what's the word I want? Just beratings, where Bagra is like insisting that she can reach her power, but everything they try, it doesn't work. She slid her hand around my wrist again, and I felt that thing inside me rising up, struggling to break the surface. I reached for it, grasping, sure I could feel it. Then she let go, and the power slipped away from me, sinking like a stone. Finally, she shooed me away with a disgusted wave of her hand. The day did not improve. I spent the rest of the morning at the library, where I was given a towering stack of books on Grisha theory and Grisha history, and informed that this was just a fraction of my reading list. At lunch, I searched for Genya, but she was nowhere to be found. She gets swarmed by people asking all of these questions. She's too preoccupied to really, like, engage, so eventually they start to, like, leave her alone. And, then it goes to combat training, and she has no skill in this area. The one thing that she kind of falls back on with relief is the fact that they are not expected to use their Grisha powers during combat. So the fact that she can't access her power is still pretty much a secret. The teacher, like, Bagra knows this, and I don't know if Genya knows this, and the Darkling knows. So far, the other students are not aware of it. I don't know how long that's going to remain true. And they talk about the differences in languages that they're all learning. Nadia is learning Suli, and Sergei was learning Shu. Everybody has their different reasons for thinking that one is better. And there's just a lot of like backbiting, all this stuff. Suli was best for missions in the Northwest. Shu meant you'd be stuck translating diplomatic papers. Sergei was an idiot who was better off learning to trade in Kerch. She took a brief break to point out the banya, an elaborate system of steam baths and cold pools nestled in a birch grove beside the little palace, then launched immediately into a rant about selfish corporalki overrunning the baths every night. Maybe combat training wouldn't be so bad. Marie and Nadia were definitely making me want to punch something. So, yeah, that's fun. And yeah, the fighting does not go well. She gets like beaten to a pulp and is told that she needs to show up extra early tomorrow. And she asks for Genya again. And Marie says that she eats and sleeps at the Grand Palace because the queen likes to make sure she's always available. And then says, and so does the king. And Nadia's like, Marie? And they both say it's just a rumor, but they clearly believe this is true. I'm very curious on whether it is. It seems like it probably would be. Or if it's something that, like, you know, has been said. And who knows, you know, there could be all kinds of reasons for somebody making up things like this. So this is when Ivan comes to get her and bring her to see the Darkling. And she thinks that he's going to like yell at her because she's not making enough progress. But really he wants to know how her first day went. And she's like, fine. And he can tell everything isn't great. But he tells her, like, everybody else has partners and people like that can do what they do and really teach them. You're the only one who can do what you do. It's going to be more difficult. So then he shows her a way to get back to her rooms that does not take her down the main hallway. And she realizes that there is no reprimand coming, that this is literally it. He just wanted to talk to her and ask her how her day was. And when she tells him that she can't believe that's all it is, at first he does his like, well, what did you think it was? Why would you think I was about to, like, you know, do something? And she's like, all right, listen, look, I'm not saying that you would do something, but you clearly can. I saw you cut a man in half. I feel like me being intimidated is fucking understandable. And he stops and finally says, all right, yeah, I get that. And she says, a little of the fear ebbed out of me. Why do you do that? He asked suddenly. Do what? He reached out and took hold of my hand. I felt that wonderful sense of surety rush through me. Rub your thumb across your palm. Oh, I laughed nervously. I hadn't even been aware I was doing it. Just another old habit. He turned my hand over and examined it in the dim light of the hallway. He dragged his thumb over the pale scar that ran across my palm. A shivery hum shot through me. Where did you get this? He asked. Karamzin? Where you grew up? Yes. The tracker is an orphan too? I drew in a sharp breath. Was his mind reading another one of his powers? But then I remembered that Mal had given testimony in the Grisha tent. Yes, I said. Is he any good? What? I was finding it hard to concentrate. The Darkling's thumb was still moving back and forth, tracing the length of the scar on my palm. At tracking, is he any good at it? The best, I said honestly. The serfs at Karamzin said he could make rabbits out of rocks. I wonder sometimes how much we really understand about our own gifts, he mused. Then he dropped my hand and opened the door. So he says goodnight, and that's the end of the chapter, and that's the end of this section. I cannot figure out, like, do we know where that scar came from in the first place? Forgive me, guys, because I read the first chapters of this at this point nearly 2 months ago. So it may have been mentioned and I forgot. Did she and Mal make like a blood pact or something? And she, you know, when I hear about scars on the palm of your hand, I always think about it and them making this like deal with one another that they'd come back. So I'm wondering if that is part of what it is. I also, the whole thing with Mal, like, is he just simply not Grisha, or is he hidden secret Grisha too that hasn't like had reason to access his abilities? I don't know. I could also see if maybe he's like, I don't know. I've got theories though. So I have to wrap up. Oh, I just saw that Ivia shared a link to a photo of Daisy Head, who is going to be playing Genya. So let's see. Oh yeah, she's pretty. She's Anthony Head's daughter. Interesting. She is a little odd looking. Interesting. I wonder how this is going to work out. And she's definitely different looking than I expected, because she looks like she's of color. And Anthony Head is obviously super British, so I don't know what her mother looks like. But, you know, that is a different direction than I thought they'd go, which is nice. Jamie says, when I saw her casting, I thought she was going to play Nina. Yeah, because she's got, like, she's not unattractive, but she's a little strange looking. And, yeah, that's surprising. Who is going to play, or going to play Nina? I thought you were talking about Alina, but Nina for the other series. Gotcha. I don't think they've said yet. Okay. Yeah, interesting. Well, do you guys know what the release date is supposed to be of the series? Have they even started filming? If they haven't said who Alina's going to be, they probably haven't started filming yet. So I'm just like wondering if by the time I finish this series, I will be able to actually watch the show or not. Fingers crossed. Avia says Alina is cast. Just a sec. Cool. I want to see who this is too. And I already know that Darkling, we talked about this last time, is Ben Barnes. I mean, I was saying that I don't find Ben Barnes that attractive, but he does have that like sort of sulky superiority thing down. So I'm sure that he'll be perfect in that role. Oh, okay. Here's the link to Alina. Oh yeah. Yeah, she's cute. Yeah, and she also looks like she's of color. Is she Asian? Jessie May Lee. Yeah, she must be. That's cool. I'm glad that they have some more people of color happening. Like, you know, it's a nice surprise when they fucking bother. All right, guys. Well, thank you again so much for hanging out with me and chatting with me and sharing all of that. And thank you, Jamie, for the commission. Appreciate it, girl. And I will be seeing you again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.